Okay, hello everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. My name's Heather Rodemaker-Taylor, and I'm with First Nations Owista. I'm excited to welcome y'all to the Initial Steps to Building an Impact Measurement Program webinar with Michael Bridge presenting. As we mentioned in our webinar description, Michael's going to utilize the logic model format, and he's going to discuss the importance of a logic model for day-to-day decision-making and year-to-year goal setting. And over the course of the webinar, he's going to develop core competencies, outcomes, and indicators. You will all have the opportunity to make comments, personal experiences, and professional needs. And we thought this topic would be really helpful for anyone thinking about or working on their organization measurement program. And you should finish the webinar with kind of a better understanding of core competencies, outcomes, indicators, metrics, and assessments for your own organization. And so this webinar is the 11th webinar in a monthly series that's part of the Native CDFI Capital Access Initiative that some of you are participating in. And this is funded by the Northwest Area Foundation. And I say this for all these webinars, but what's great about this webinar series is that topics discussed focus on different ways to grow your capacity to access capital, which is a challenge we all face. So now to get us prepared, I'm going to share some quick information with you about the GoToWebinar platform, and I want to let everyone know that we're also recording this webinar, so you'll be able to revisit it later if you like, or if you missed something, or just want to kind of see it again. If you could all start by utilizing the chat feature and introduce the organization that you're representing, and we can test out the system that way. So I'll give you a few seconds to just type into the chat section of the webinar platform. See, we have Hopi Credit Association here and Black Hills Community. So, and we have Taloa Dini Nation here as well. Oh, and I see Meskwaki Economic Development, which is great. Perfect. So thank you for that. It means it's working, which is good for me to hear too. Yeah, so good morning again. Thanks for joining us. And so if you have any questions throughout the webinar, just feel free to use that chat or question feature and type in your question, and we can address it with Michael as it comes up. I'll just make sure that I'll be watching that the whole time, and I'll just interrupt him, and he knows that's coming, and we'll pose your question as it comes. Perfect. Oops. Oh, and I see Phoebe's joining us from Maine, and Shelly's here, and we also have someone with Tigwa. Perfect. Awesome. So yeah, that being said, I just wanted to turn to Michael Bridge. He's the Principal Director of Development and Engagement for Sweetgrass Consulting. Since 2007, he's engaged in survey and data analysis, report writing, asset-based problem solving, ecological change assessments, participatory mapping, youth development, community beautification, eco-building, and tourism initiatives. His work's primarily been conducted in collaboration with various Lakota tribes in South Dakota, but also with farmers and ranchers in eastern Colorado and even a school district in northern Colorado. So that being said, it's my pleasure to introduce Michael Bridge. And Michael, I'll let you take it away.
Okay, thank you so much, Heather. I just want to say thank you to First Nations Owista Corporation for allowing us to do this, and especially for Heather, who has dedicated a lot of time and technical assistance to gear this presentation to the webinar so it can be viewed by all of you today. And of course, I want to thank all of you all for taking your time as well. I saw a brief a part of the registration list, and there's definitely people from east to west coast and everywhere in between, so thank you all. I don't want to go too much about myself. I think Heather did a great job of that already. But to my role as far as it goes with monitoring, evaluation, and thus impact tracking programs. Began collecting data in 2008, as she had mentioned, through various forms, whether it be surveys, household surveys, community assessments, etc. In 2011, I took a monitoring and evaluation class at CSU, and then developed that class in 2012 as an online format geared towards monitoring and developing specific programs, events, elements of that nature, but not only monitoring and evaluating, but doing it in a community-based format to where you're working hands-on, back and forth with the organization that you're working with, as opposed to that top-down approach, more of a community-based collaborative approach. And then in 2013, after having created that course in 2013, Sweetgrass began tracking, impact tracking for various Native CDFIs, Native Community Development Corporations, and other Native nonprofits. All right, just a brief overview. What we're going to do is highlight the importance of incorporating an impact measurement program, and then utilize the logic model format to discuss the importance of an impact measurement program for day-to-day decision-making and year-to-year goal setting. We're going to develop core competencies, outcomes, and indicators, as Heather mentioned. You all will have the opportunity to ask questions and make comments based on your personal experience and professional needs. And it's my intent of this entire webinar that you all will leave knowing how to create core competencies, outcomes, and indicators for your own organizations. And these are key elements to creating an impact measurement program. Then you will be able to create your own assessments, data tracking tools specific to your organization on your own. So before we begin digging deep here, if I could ask two questions. What is an impact measurement program? And why is an impact measurement program important? Well, an impact measurement program is the process and activities that your organization implements to manage performance and track progress toward your desired goals and outcomes. But that second question I asked, and I would like for you all to think about for a little bit and utilize your chat function, please. Why is this important? Why is it important to manage performance and track progress towards your desired goals and outcomes? It'd be great if we could get some feedback, if you all could provide some responses.
I see a response. I see a couple of responses here. So, wow. So Samantha said that it can provide accountability towards growth and goals, which is actually something I was going to say if I didn't see a response. So that's great. Anna said, as a service providers, we need to know our activities are effective. Deborah Nelson, Callie said, to know if the program is reaching the right people and its outcomes. And Shelley added, to report to funders and to be sure we're doing what we intended to do.
Perfect. Yes, all of those are correct.
And I have a couple more, Michael.
Go for it.
Phoebe said it underscores how well you are or are not meeting your mission. And Cecilia says to ensure our organization is on the right track to fulfill goals and objectives. So that's awesome. Thank you so much, everybody, for adding that.
Okay, great. Yeah, so just to reiterate, most of what you already said is on here. I will start really quickly before I reiterate some of the things you said with the whole idea of, yes, of course, data gathering, tracking, management, and reporting. But what exactly is data is a question that I think some people ask, and some people, even myself who's in this every day, can forget what exactly constitutes data. And I think for the purpose of your organization, you can see data as any information that's out there. Any information that is out there. Let me give you an example. Let's use, I was going to say a big cable company, but I don't even know if cable is a real thing anymore. I think it just shoots through the air. Physics is not my thing. But anyways, let's use a big, we'll call it a cable company. The data they collect is information on their phone bill, the survey at the end of a phone call or email when you call them and they say, can you please take this survey? And most of us do not. This call will be monitored for quality assurance purposes. That's data gathering, the actual recording of your phone call. Their payroll and the information that they provide when they pay people, how much, raises, etc. Their client and contractor tracking, what clients use them, what contractors use them, who utilizes their services, materials and procurement, how materials are being used, are materials being used too frivolously, etc. Data is anything, you know. So for a native CDFI, you all know what data is. It's you know, the loans that you provide, but also jobs that are created, looking more in depth at the health and well-being of people who have utilized your services for a period of time. And it may have seemed silly for me to provide an example like that, but I bring it up because it happens frequently where we may be working with an organization for 3 or 4 months, and our partnership, I would say, hey, send me all forms that you have that is used to collect information. You know, any form that you all utilize. And then we'll get the ball rolling, starting a logic model and such that we're going to go through today. And 3 or 4 months later, I'll be having a one-on-one conversation with someone. They'll be like, oh, well, we have this form, you know, we thought about using it one time, or we use it occasionally, you know, once a month or every other week. And I'm like, man, this form is perfect, you know, and this is data. So oftentimes I think people don't even realize they're collecting more data than they know. So just keep that in mind. But back to the importance. Not only is it important to data gather, track, manage and report, but to inform that day-to-day, week-to-week, and annual decision-making at levels, the employee level, the programmatic level, and organizational level. Track economic, social, political, cultural, environmental changes. Tracking the impact created by your organization at the internal, community, regional, national levels, and abroad. And telling your story to yourselves, you know, inform your purpose, employee gratification, accolades. To the community to bolster esteem, community esteem, direction, inform naysayers. You know, there's always those negative Nancys, and unfortunately, sometimes those negative Nancys are correct. But it's good to be able to tell your story to them in a valid way to which all people in the community understand what's going on. That way they can make informed decisions whether they want to be a naysayer or not. Telling your story to other organizations in the forms of best practices, lessons learned, or building a model. And then, of course, to philanthropists and funders, proving what you already knew, framing your story, and expounding on your story in new ways. These are elements that were all considered by the community members who just used the chat function, informing that day-to-day, week-to-week, and annual decision-making, reaching the right people and your outcomes. If you're not that would be a good time to look at your organization and make changes. And holding the people accountable to do that at the employee level. There's four main components of an impact measurement program, and that's metrics, assessment tools, data management, and reporting. Now, the data management and reporting will be the focus of webinar 2 in October. And this webinar will focus on the metrics and assessment tools. However, I do want to mention one thing under data, so we clear that off their plate and ignore data management and reporting for the rest of the webinar. And that's that bolded element of priority. An impact measurement program must be prioritized for it to work. It must be prioritized. It must be continually discussed at weekly staff meetings, supported by administration, and folded even into employee work plans and duties. I imagine many of you on the call, let's face it, we're all getting a little long in the teeth. That's why we're doing things like this. You know, we have jobs to where we're looking at the impact tracking. So please just remember, no one even knows who Kevin Costner is anymore. And due to continual infrastructure development, there are hardly any fields, especially fields of dreams. So just keep in mind, if we build it, they will not come. I love that movie back in the day, but if we build an impact measurement program, it won't just start working. It will not come. We have to make it a priority. And we have ideas that I've talked about and sent to other people how you can make that a priority, because I know that it's not a matter of feeling it's a priority and knowing that it's a priority, but everyone is faced with limited resources, limited access, varying levels of capacity that makes actualizing that priority difficult. So I understand that people really want to do this, but then when they start looking at that possible capacity differences, time, things of that nature, it makes it very difficult. There are ways to incorporate it and fold it into your daily or weekly routine. I've heard feedback from various CDFIs about how they do that as well. But for this webinar, we'll focus on metrics, so identifying core competencies and outcomes, creating indicators and metrics, and then I'll leave you with the ability to create your own assessment tools by looking at a gap analysis, data harvest, and then data collection instruments. Please, you all, if you have questions or comments, just send a chat to Heather throughout, okay? We're going to look into these key terms next, but before we do that, there's an important poll. Heather has a question that she wants to ask and gain feedback from everyone.
Yes, I'm going to launch our first poll. And here we go. And this is critical. So I'm going to give you all a couple of seconds to answer this poll, and then we'll... Oh, I see I've got about half of you voted. Give you just a couple more seconds. All right, I got about 3/4. Nice. All right, I'm going to close it in just a couple seconds. I'm at 80% or so have voted. All right, I'm going to close it now then, and I'm going to share it. So we had 48% said that of the people polled said that they do like hamburgers, and 52% said they prefer cheeseburgers. So we had no no's or no vegetarians. So.
Wow. Wow. Okay, that's 100% like cheeseburgers. So I'm pretty sure at least one slide in this webinar you all will appreciate. So please stay tuned. Don't leave us now, okay? We're about 1/5 of the way through, but it gets useful as we go along. Excellent. Okay. Let me go back quickly. We're now going to delve into these key terms, keeping it in mind your data related to cheeseburgers. We'll come back to that. All right. When Sweetgrass conducts an impact measurement program, we always start, and I want to reiterate, there's various ways to do this, but we like to start with a logic model. A logic model takes a narrow, practical look at the relationship between programs and services, which some call activities, over to your left, and results or outcomes. So how programs and services create outcomes. It's often presented as a table listing the steps from programs and services to the achievement of a desired goal. Now, I'll go over this briefly, and this is just a visual of what a logic model looks like, and then we will go over it in depth, piece by piece, discussing programs, impact goals, core competencies, outcomes, indicators, and metrics. This is a simplified version, just so you all can grasp the idea. And when I say so you all can grasp the idea, I'm not assuming there's people on the call that have never seen something like this before. I'm just speaking broadly, so please forgive me. I'm not trying to make a stab at anyone or anything like that. I'm just speaking in broad terms to the audience. As I mentioned, there is more than one way to do this. Some folks use a mission statement as opposed to an impact goal derived from their mission statement. So that top box for some would have a mission statement. Some prefer breaking outcomes down into short-term, mid-term, and long-term, or indicators into short-term, mid-term, and long-term indicators. And some folks will often combine indicators and metrics, and I'll show you an idea of what that means shortly. When we discuss short-term, mid-term, and long-term, I want you all to think in these terms. Short-term would be 6 months to 2 years. Mid-term would be 2 to 5 years. And long-term would be 5 years or more. So setting this up, it's really a matter of what suits your organization best, but we will discuss that as we go along. But let's go ahead and start dissecting these 6 components piece by piece, starting with programs and services. Some fairly common programs and services for native CDFIs include loans, business loan, microloan, credit builder loan, mortgages, consumer loans, technical assistance and coaching. That would also include one-on-ones or counseling. This is during the pre-loan phase, during loan, post-loan, or during any program really, pre-program, during the program, post-program. Various trainings such as financial education, credit building, professional development, arts development. Individual child and youth development accounts are common among you all. VITA, and other elements like workforce development. So think it over if you can and begin documenting all of your programs and services. Sometimes this is more difficult than you would think. Sometimes organizations offer services that aren't necessarily a program, so sometimes it kind of slips in the cracks when an organization is thinking about all the many things they do. Listing programs and services, I should add, is often gratifying to do with a group of staff members at a whiteboard or taking notes somewhere else, just to list the amount of programs and services that you offer to your community, the type of activities you're involved with. Oftentimes it's very gratifying because, you know, people often have their different things they're in charge of or involved with and tend to not know everything that's going on. So when you put it all together, it's a really neat experience to see people thinking, wow, we really do a lot day to day, week to week, and year to year. So you have a list of programs and services, and if possible, hopefully you're writing them down now. The next element we look at is the impact goal. One overarching impact goal derived from your mission statement, website, or overall knowledge of your organization or the communities you serve. So the impact goal is one overarching statement derived from your mission, website, or overall knowledge of your organization or the communities you serve. When you're thinking about what an impact goal might be, you can think of these questions. How do we define success? When I'm using these pronouns like we and our, think of your organization. How do we define success? What would it look like if we did not exist? What are our funders or program participants expecting to get out from their investment in the program? Someone joins our program, what do they become? What are their outcomes? Given what you know today, what will be different in your community in the long term as a result of successfully reaching your impact, your goals? So an example of an impact goal that we're going to utilize throughout is an economically savvy local workforce. It's expected that the generic example of a CDFI, I'm using native CDFI, their impact goal is an economically savvy local workforce. So in order to achieve an economically savvy local workforce, there are things that we need to be really good at. And each native CDFI and Community Development Corporation and others, nonprofits in general, have several specific things that they do really well at. Several specific will go to them for specific help. So think big picture with core competencies of your organization. There should be 3 to 5, and it basically centers around what does your organization do really well at? What does your organization do really well at? What are the community needs or problems you're trying to address? Who are your competitors and potential collaborators? Think of these questions as you're developing core competencies for your organization or for a specific program. So there's generally 3 to 5 core competencies. And here's an example of 3 that we'll use throughout. Business education, financing, and workforce development. Now, some other examples might include cultural asset building, business incubation, advocacy, lobbying, economic asset development, and networking. So these are really big picture. You can say networking, what do you mean by that? Advocacy, what do you mean by that? Well, these core competencies, these big picture core competencies, we can break them down further, and that'll be the next step. So if the main three things that your organization excels at is business education, financing, and workforce development, next we need to define outcomes. What are the outcomes if we're good at business education, financing, and workforce development? Okay, like core competencies, outcomes are big picture goals. For example, entrepreneurial capacity and understanding. Outcomes are the results or changes that occur from participation in your organization's programs. Someone participates in your programs, what are the results or changes from that? An outcome is defined as the way a thing turns out, a consequence. They are big picture goals that you want to see accomplished through your programs and services. They are also the goals of your core competencies. So oftentimes when you're thinking about outcomes, these are questions that you should ask yourself when you develop an outcomes for your organization. What will be different as a result of participating? What will be changed or improved? What will beneficiaries say is the value of the program? What will they say about why they come? Why do we carry out our major activities? What values do you want your clients to express through their attitudes or behaviors? Now, generally, there's 3 to 5 outcomes per core competency. So there'll be 3 to 5 outcomes that occur that will allow you to prove that you're being a successful organization. Successful as defined by your core competencies. For this example, you would be able to successfully prove through your outcomes that you're providing business education, financing, and workforce development. Now, some outcomes that could be used to prove that you're providing successful business education, financing, and workforce development could be bankability, lending, and job creation. So in other words, if business development, business education is a core competency, one of the outcomes is going to be bankability, people's ability to utilize a bank and its services. If financing is one of your core competencies, then one of the 3 to 5 outcomes to prove that core competency would be lending. That your organization is becoming a lender and people that can trust when they need money for a business or a home or something of that nature. And if one of your core competencies is workforce development, then certainly one of the outcomes will be job creation. Some other examples of outcomes would include job placement, infrastructure, access to resources, educational programs, business development, and economic wealth. How do we know if these outcomes are being achieved? Can we take a second? How do we know if these outcomes are being achieved? And if you all could send a chat to Heather, that would be great. How do we know that lending is occurring, job creation, bankability?
Not seeing anything yet, but just for myself, in terms of lending, I guess, you can always use your loan portfolio.
Yes.
Oh, and I see Anna just provided some feedback. She said lending is occurring based on the number of loans output.
Yep.
And Phoebe added to that. She said tracking outcome data gleaned from annual reporting, borrower interviews, loans closed, services provided, etc. Cecilia said we see results, receive positive feedback from clients. And Natalie said reporting the numbers periodically and sharing with staff, board, etc., and also by producing annual reports, etc.
Great. Okay, thank you all. So there was one, getting very specific, the number of loans output. That number, connecting a number to it. Others mentioned specific assessment types. The assessment type is where you track your information. So that would be annual reporting and weekly reporting. Two people mentioned that, staff reports, weekly reporting, annual reports. And then those real life stories, those stories from community members, feedback, positive feedback from clients. These are ways in which you can tell that outcomes are occurring. With that said, we're going to flip to the next slide, indicators. Now that you have both core competencies and outcomes, you would develop indicators that measure your success in completing your outcomes. So choose an outcome to work with if you're able to do it sitting at your desk or wherever you may be sitting. An outcome such as bankability, lending, job creation, or one that your own organization has. Choose an outcome to think about. The purpose of an indicator is to describe what change you want to see in your outcomes. An indicator is the evidence that an outcome is occurring. It indicates whether it is occurring. Indicators usually have growth or direction assigned to them. So what does that mean? Like, for example, a growth or direction assigned to them. Ona mentioned that the number of loans output is an indicator, and it is an indicator. To add growth or direction to that would even make it more solid, such as increase of loans output or increase of clients who received a loan, or %. That's starting to get more into metrics, so I'll stop right there. Increase, decrease, enhanced, things like that show direction to your indicator. So take the outcome that you're working with and ask these questions. What do you need to know to show that it's being met? And think about that value or growth or direction assigned to it. Number of loans, which Ona mentioned. Increase in loans. The ones listed here that we'll use throughout. A credit score increase. Increase in business loans, and decrease in unemployment. All of these are ways to prove, if we want to go back for a second, an increased credit score is one way to see if we're reaching our outcome of bankability. Increase in business loans is one way to see if we're meeting that outcome of lending. And a decrease in unemployment, which is much more difficult to grasp, but with the right assessment and tools, you certainly can, allows us to see if the outcome of job creation, that is one element to see if the outcome of job creation is occurring. few more examples include increased use of a savings account, increase in average loan amounts, decreased reliance on government assistance, increased connection to land and history, increase in outreach and presentations, increase in involvement in cultural, possibly spiritual activities, increase in assets purchased. These are all examples of indicators. I'm going to move to the next slide. Feel free to chime in if you all have any questions or comments. A metric. A metric is defined as a system or standard of measurement, and it gets turned into a question that will be on a form, whether it be a loan portfolio, such as someone mentioned, a question to get at the indicator. So a metric is what is used to track changes of your indicator. A metric is used to track changes of your indicator.
Michael, can I interrupt real quick?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, sorry, just had a question come through from Shelley. She said, are indicators also referred to as outputs? That I've seen logic model. Oh, okay, sorry. Are indicators also referred to as outputs that I've seen in other logic models?
Yes, outputs are seen as they're not as large, big picture as outcomes, but they are, yes, they are the results. They're the things that are going to, if your outcomes are occurring, the outputs, the actual, I guess, breaking those outcomes down. I believe that outputs are the same as indicators. I could be checked on that, but in my use of the term, I don't use the term outputs, but in my understanding, yes, outputs and indicators are the same. Outputs are your outcomes broken down further. Okay. Sometimes folks will combine metrics with their impacts, kind of combining the two steps that we talked about in creating indicators and now metrics. It should be noted that metrics can be categorized into short, mid, and long term as well. So a metric further takes those indicators and puts increments to it. Maybe increments over a time frame, or combining that, say, credit score change. Credit score change is an indicator, but adding that 6 months, what is your credit score change at 6 months? That's a metric that can be used, because it can be used again, credit score change at 12 months. So it really starts to indicate, it starts to measure the degree that your indicator is occurring. So your indicator might be that, or an output may be that credit score change. But the metric really gets down to the degree of which that score is changing. Because you'd be able to compare it at 6 months, at 12 months, and so on. I could think of a thermometer if, think of the old school thermometers with the mercury in the glass, and they looked, I don't know, they were so simple, they looked cool. You know, it has mercury in it that moves around, and you know the negative implications of mercury. But for the purpose of this example, let's say we're looking at a thermometer and an indicator would be a rise in mercury level. The metric would be that the specific degrees to which the mercury is rising. So this really gets at the ways to measure your indicator. We'll utilize these three examples at the bottom as metrics. And here are a few other examples. Self-reporting. Someone mentioned feedback from clients earlier. Often our data is derived from self-reporting. So self-reporting on unemployment in the community would be a metric. Increased percent of income spent on healthy food purchases. 50% of clients increase credit scores over X amount of time. Loans increased by 10% from previous year, or 5 more outreach events than prior year. Here's another example to delve further into indicators and metrics. Okay, we have our outcome that we've been talking about. One of the outcomes of the three we discussed was bankability. And the indicators we would use to indicate whether bankability is occurring is credit score increase, increased participation with a savings account, increased financial responsibility, and enhanced assets. I want to take a couple of seconds here and have you all respond. What are some metrics? What are some things that can be used to measure and track changes of these indicators? You can pick an indicator and send a metric that would be useful to measure the degree to which those indicators are occurring.
I see Stephen Scott posted deployment ratio.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Any others? All right. It's interesting when you teach a class, you ask a question and there's crickets chirping, so you have to be silent and count to 10. But wow, on a webinar, crickets are chirping for the entire hour and 15 minutes. So it's really different because there is no, you can't, obviously I can't hear you all, but hopefully you're having somewhat fun or at least learning something.
Yeah, and I see 2 more responses here from folks. So Shelly said number of new bank accounts, and Phoebe said variance between beginning credit score and ending credit score at 6-month intervals.
Yes, perfect. These are some of the metrics. Go right ahead.
Credit report findings.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So we have these metrics, and then it's a matter of making sure that they are being tracked properly, which we will begin discussing towards the end of the webinar. But all of you all mentioned metrics, and here's a few others just to show that to what degree the indicators are being achieved to prove the outcome of bankability. Is there any questions or comments as I move further? Okay, well, just to tie all this back in, programs and services or activities make the short, mid, and long-term outcomes occur. The impact goal is the ultimate goal of your organization, or the goal of one of your organization's programs or services. And sometimes we use a mission statement in lieu of an impact goal. Core competencies are what your organization or program does really well, and think big picture. Outcomes are the results or changes that occur from participation in one of your organization's programs or services. Indicators are the evidence that an outcome is occurring. And metrics are used to track the degree of change of the indicators. So that's why these arrows are here to the right. Basically, the metrics prove that the indicators are occurring. The indicators prove that the outcomes are occurring. The outcomes prove that you are doing your core competencies really well. And if these things continue to align, your impact goal will be met. If the core competencies, outcomes, indicators do not support the mission statement or impact goal, or vice versa, then that's when it's time, for those day-to-day activities or at the employee level or those year-to-year goal setting, that's when it's time to reconsider those things. You may need to reconsider your goals, reconsider your core competencies, or reconsider programs and services. Are there some programs that we're doing that doesn't really, for the amount of time and effort we're spending, is it really leading to the outcomes that we want? Or are there some programs and services that are just amazing and we're producing even more outcomes than we originally thought, and anywhere in between? It could be a matter of, you know what, we're doing the things we need and want. Maybe we need to reevaluate our mission statement. So it is a reiterative process where, not surprisingly, everything is connected, and it will continually change. Okay, for the 100% of people on the call who like hamburgers, this one is for you. Just a brief run through one more time how we can do this with nonprofit, a for-profit. It really doesn't matter. If this is the way that an organization decides to organize their thoughts in a way that they can effectively track data. It doesn't have to be native CDFI, CDC. It could even be a for-profit organization. So we got this burger joint, and the programs and services they offer are walk-in drive-through, counter and table service, and breakfast, lunch, and supper. Their impact goal is to craft an exquisite cheeseburger, so especially for you 52%ers out there, this is for you. Core competencies, things this burger joint needs to be good at, would be with their freshness and their ability to provide fresh foods, a variety of foods and ingredients, and then those secret ingredients. You got secret sauce or that special hodgepodge of 2 to 3 different cheeses, whatever that might be. One of the many outcomes to see if they're doing well crafting this exquisite cheeseburger would be if it's preferred by locals. Indicators to indicate a local preference would be increase in sales and increase in customer traffic. And which many of you already mentioned today, there's many metrics, numbers, and values on profit loss statements, which could be used to indicate, to measure increase in sales. And a metric for customer traffic could be number of cars and lot in comparison to others during prime time eating hours. Now we've utilized this format of a logic model just to show the ins and outs and workings of it. In reality, once a logic model is started, it gets much more complex once you start looking at 3 to 5 core competencies and then 3 to 5 outcomes for each core competency. It generally looks something like this. And this is an example of utilizing short, mid, and long-term metrics. This is all the information we've far today, starting with programs and services. The three main core competencies, the big picture elements that your organization is really good at, the outcomes that should be occurring if you're being successful at educating, financing, and creating a developed workforce, indicators, and then the short, mid, and long-term metrics. One lady, I believe it was Shelley, mentioned last, a metric would be credit score change over various periods of time. And that's shown here in this as well. I left some blanks to indicate that it's a continual process. Things may be added over time. We could look at this right now, filling it out, honestly. I mean, also, long-term metrics, there's generally lesser amount of long-term metrics or long-term indicators or long-term outcomes since you're talking 5 to 10 years away. There's often less of them, and they're often a little less specific. You know, long-term, let me go to indicator, for example. A long-term indicator could be something like changing the tribal business model to create greater for-profit native entrepreneurs. You know, that's not a 1 year, 2 year, 4 year thing. It could start being measured in the short term. You could have short-term metrics to begin measuring that, but that's a long-term thing that would require long-term metrics to measure as well. Is there questions or comments?
I'm not seeing any, Michael.
All right. This is one example again. There's many ways to do this. Some folks do short, mid to long-term outcomes or indicators, and this is an example of short, mid, and long-term metrics. All right, next steps are work. Not really homework, but hopefully you can do it at work. After this webinar, it's my hopes that you'll be able to utilize what we've talked about thus far and what we're going to talk about, along with the recording of this webinar, to develop your own logic model for your entire organization, or maybe just for one program of your organization. Next, we're going to talk about developing assessment tools, and these are things that will happen afterwards if you so choose, or if you all have the time and ability to make that happen. Developing assessment tools, and I'm going to briefly go over a data harvest and a gap analysis, which are both needed to create or enhance the tools that you currently use or tools that you're thinking about using. So let's start with the data harvest and gap analysis. All right. A data harvest is exactly what it seems. If you're going to start an impact tracking, impact measurement program, first you need to have a comprehensive idea of everything you're already tracking. So collect all the tools your organization uses: intakes, applications, coaching notes, memos, performance evaluations, surveys, weekly employee memos, grant reporting requirements, conference call confirmations. It just goes on and on. Even things like conference call confirmations, I don't think people, including myself until just a couple weeks ago, really consider that data tracking, but that has everything to do with the meetings that you have, the outreach that you have. You know, so even if you have a conference call line, you get an email every time you hang up. I just put that right into, I just saved that right into a file, and that's data right there of the amount of conference calls that I have related to a specific subject. You can get as in-depth or as not in-depth as you'd like, but recommend that you collect all assessment tools that your organization uses. Then you would take a database. We predominantly use Excel. You don't need sophisticated databases to do this. You list all the questions and or metrics from the assessment tools into a database. So you have all of your questions listed on the left-hand column. And then you decide which questions you're currently collecting correlate with specific outcomes and indicators. So let me show you all what this looks like if you don't mind. This is an example of a data harvest and gap analysis we've done in the past for an organization. You'll see on the left, that's the actual form, the assessment tool it came from. These questions that are listed here, your child support, your utilities, the signature of the success coach, why do I need a credit builder loan? All of these questions are found in this specific form or assessment tool by that organization. Now you see at the bottom left corner it says 112. This particular data harvesting gap analysis went to over 800, listing out all the different questions from every form. There's various ways to do that. You do not have to go that extensive at all, so don't get scared, please. But this is our data harvest. We're harvesting all of our information and piling it into one storage bin, if we want to use the term harvest. We're harvesting our foods and put it in a storage bin. Now, across the top here, you can see two core competencies that are italicized. The business loans is a core competency, and at the end you see building. I'd have to maximize that more. Who knows what that says, but probably something like building assets, you know. So you can see two core competencies italicized. After the core competency of business loan, you will see the outcomes. So if a core competency is business loan, some of the outcomes for this organization is loan client readiness, loan client capacity, entrepreneurial capacity, loan client self-sufficiency. So this is what is meant by data harvesting. You've developed core competencies and outcomes and indicators. This list doesn't have indicators, but you can go as in depth and write your indicators across the top as well. And then across the side, you have your forms and your questions. I'm going to revisit this page again in a second. So you've harvested all of your data. Now you need to do a gap analysis. Investigate which outcomes, indicators, and metrics are not being currently used by your organization. So you're basically understanding where there are holes or gaps in your data. Understanding where there are holes or gaps in your data. Then you will need to create new questions to put into forms based on outcomes or indicators that are currently not being addressed. In doing that, if you only come up with a handful, you might decide, hey, I need to just add this to an existing form. I need to add this to an existing assessment tool. But if there are a lot of things that you find you're not tracking, that's when it's time to create new forms. So let me show you on this next slide again how to do the gap analysis part. So you've listed all your forms and exactly what questions that you have. Once again, you don't need to be this extensive. You don't have to put applicant signature, applicant date, co-applicant signature, things of that nature. Across the top, you have your core competencies, your outcomes, and you can put indicators in there. Now, our gap analysis is this area right here. We go through, and every question that is asked by every form in an organization, and with the X, we indicate which outcome it is speaking to. So if we want to see if someone is loan client ready, part of what we want to look at is their personal expenses. So that's why all these X's are here beside personal expenses, personal expenses, personal expenses. All of these are questions or metrics that will help address that story of if your client is loan ready. It will help address that story. It indicates whether your loan client has capacity or has built capacity. You don't see any X's under entrepreneurial capacity because their personal expenses is not necessarily going to tell you if they've increased their ability to be an entrepreneur. So this is the gap analysis. You decide which questions you have are speaking to your outcomes. And then you notice where the gaps are and what is not being spoken to. Let's do a reverse example of this. Say you have a funder hounding your back, or you're just excited to know for some other reason. You really want to look to see how well you're doing at loan client capacity building. If you've created a data harvest and gap analysis like this, you can pull open the spreadsheet and look at all the X's under loan client capacity. So you will know, hey, part of the way I can indicate whether this outcome is being met is by going to the credit builder loan application and looking at expenses, looking at the question, why do I need a credit builder loan? And list 3 ways good credit will. I can't remember the rest of that question. But you can see exactly what data you're tracking and how that relates to an outcome. Now, when there are areas and you have questions that aren't addressing an outcome, that's where you know there's a gap. Like, wow, we have these outcomes and we don't really have a way to prove, for example, entrepreneurial capacity is being built, that column G. Well, I can assure you further down on this table there were X's proving entrepreneurial capacity was being built. But at least from this little tidbit segment, somebody could say, hey, you're not collecting enough data to prove that your entrepreneurial capacity is being built. That's when you start coming up with new questions and deciding what types of forms that data should be on. Some common assessment and tools include an inquiry, which is a first contact with a possible client to gather information on their goals, training registrations, general evaluations of trainings, which you all will take shortly, an intake, which gathers baseline data for impact tracking, a program application, once a person decides, hey, there's a specific program, an IDA program, for example, workforce development program, for example, that I want to engage with. Then there's program applications. Sorry, I just said that. There's annual follow-ups or also like yearly assessments. You know, where are they now? Post-program follow-up. So an individual walks into your organization for the first time ever. They fill out an inquiry. And they maybe take some trainings. Fairly simple. But if they want to start getting really involved, they fill out an intake form which gathers all that extensive information. You know, what's the color of your first stepsister's left eye? What are all the elements in your DNA? Those tough questions. I'm just kidding, but a lot of questions in the intake to gather baseline data. Let me briefly tell you something we run across, and that's the difference between an inquiry and an intake. An inquiry we see, as I mentioned, someone walks into your office for the first time. Some organizations have inquiries that are two plus pages. That scares people away, and it's really a bit not necessary. You know, the inquiry would be almost more of like a coach's note memo or something, that one half to a full page asking, hey, who you are, is there a way we can contact you, why are you here, and how did you find out about us? And then possibly a next step section. A next step, so you can say what might be best. Should that person go speak to such and such for IDAs, or should he go speak to Sally Sue for credit building and things of that nature? Once they decide they want to integrate into a program, then it's time to fill out that intake that asks for, you know, their specific mailing address, their specific physical address, and some of that other baseline data about their housing, health, well-being, community perception, stuff like that. You want that baseline data because that's the stuff that is not tracked as much for CDFIs, but that's what people are really wanting to start seeing. You know, how is this in fact impacting the community at a larger level? And if you don't gather that baseline data from the intake, then you're not going to be able to prove with the annual follow-up how changes are being made over time. Some other tools that folks utilize or could utilize would include weekly staff reports, coaching, counseling, and one-on-one tracking, market studies, housing assessments, household surveys, feasibility assessments, community environmental assessments, policy recommendations tracking. This list could go on forever. Even aggregate tools. Aggregate where it would compile data. So for example, at the organizational level, your organization might have a lot of different programs. So there could be one tool that lets you know within a few looks exactly how much grant funding is being funneled into all of your programs put together. Or it'll aggregate success stories from the various different programs. Oh, wow, I didn't hear about the success story from the IDA because I work on the evaluation side of things, or I work on the entrepreneurial capacity side of things. So that's cool. It can combine success stories. Or, for example, employment numbers throughout the whole organization, or tracking volunteers as opposed to just by project. This aggregate tool can provide you these organizational level elements. Two other examples of aggregate tools that CDFIs are either using or have the opportunity to use is the South Dakota Native Homeownership Coalition statewide data tracking system. So most CDFIs, all CDFIs, are tracking data at some level in varying degrees. Some are using Outcome Tracker, Excel, paper, Google Forms, etc. The statewide data tracking system allows all the CDFI, not just CDFIs, Native homeownership entities involved with Native homeownership across South Dakota, tracking their data in one place to get statewide data. That's an aggregate tool. Otis is another example of that. OISTA is currently developing Otis. It's the Opportunity to Impact system. It's a comprehensive system built by Sweetgrass on an outcome tracker by VistaShare platform. And that can be used, that will be able to be used nationally for native CDFIs to use pre-built data collection instruments and then customize them to meet their needs at the nationwide level. And moving forward, there's 3 more questions that I would like to ask you all, and if you all could respond, and we'll conclude with a conversation based on these 3, as well as other questions, comments, or ideas that you all present.
Perfect. I'm going to go. Oh, sorry.
Thank you. Thank you,
I was
Heather.
just going to go ahead and launch these for you.
Perfect.
I'm just going to give you a couple of seconds. This first question Michael put together for y'all is, do you feel your organization is collecting the appropriate data? So we have yes, no, maybe, I don't know. So I'll give you a couple of seconds. Oh, I see the votes coming now. About half of you have voted, so just give you a couple more seconds. All right, we have about 56% of y'all voted. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll, and I'm going to share the results here. So we had 29% of you say yes. We had about 36% say no, 14% said maybe, and 21% said I don't know. And then I'm going to go ahead and launch the second poll if you want, Michael. Or do you want to take a second?
Please.
Okay.
No, that's okay.
All right. So do you feel your organization should be collecting more data, should be collecting? So you can say yes, no, maybe, I don't know again. And I'll give you all a couple seconds to fill that out.
What was the maybe and I don't know numbers on the first one?
Let me see. I'll be able to pull it up once I manage this one. Okay, so we have 56% voted again, so I'm going to close this and share that. So for this one, we had 86% say yes, they feel their organization should be collecting more data. 0 say no, 7 said maybe, and 7% said I don't know. So I'm going to hide that, and then I'm going to pull up the last poll, and then I'll let you know what those first numbers were, Michael.
Thank you.
So for this last one, would this likely include creating new assessment tools, enhancing existing tools, or a combination of both? So you can either choose, we need to create new assessment tools, we need to enhance the tools we have, we need to do both these things, or I'm not sure. And I'll just give you all a couple seconds. We've got about 12% voting. Oh, and it's coming in. We're at about 30% now. Oh, okay, and we got about 56% too. Again, so I'm going to close this again. So we had 21% say we need to enhance the tools we have, and we had 79% both these things. We didn't get anybody that voted for the first or last one there. And then let me see at the first one. The first numbers were 29% for yes, Michael, 36% for no, 14% for maybe, and 21% for I don't know.
Okay. All right.
And then we had folks that didn't answer because they kind of mentioned that they were a consultant, so they didn't feel that they could take this poll.
Okay, no problem. Okay, so when you're looking at collecting data, do you need to collect more data? Some of those questions of, the maybe or I don't knows, that's in the, I find myself in those situations often in life, so I can relate. I can relate to you. But that would be a matter of questions like, around the fall and into the year, am I scrambling everywhere to try to pull numbers and data together for the reports that I need created. It may be a matter of having all those numbers, but they're in various different places. It may be a matter of not really even having those numbers and not being able to prove certain things. There may be questions that people ask you, and you're able to say, oh, yes, you know, I did this, and, you know, this community member was so warm and appreciative of what we had done for them, and similar to the other community member down the road, and those things are awesome. There's often people that pry for more information. Okay, great, cool. Can you prove that to me? Well, yeah, I have these stories, and I do have some numbers. I have numbers of loans and the amount of loans and the amount that did not go into foreclosure and things. But you may not be able to show how that's really affecting child well-being and things of that nature. And if you want to be able to and you don't, these are types of things, questions that you should consider asking if you're looking at the data that you collect and if you think you should collect more. 86% said, yeah, we should collect more. I want to make a comment when you're looking into tools, perhaps creating new assessments or utilizing existing ones, which 100% mentioned enhancing existing or a combo of both. Be creating new tools or enhancing existing ones. I mentioned some of the brief differences of what I consider differences of inquiries and intakes. I think oftentimes inquiries are too long. Therefore, organizations end up not using them, or participants don't want to fill them out. Sometimes intakes are quite long too, or program assessments, but that is where you get that baseline data to really prove everything that your outcomes. One of the biggest issues that organizations have, and let me just see if I can feel your vibe, shake your head yes, if this is true for you, is follow-ups, program follow-ups, year-end follow-ups, program outtakes, things of that nature are very difficult to get filled out. You know, a client finishes a program, it's very difficult to get that client to then fill out more data, you know, fill out more information. And oftentimes that creates a problem with people not being able to collect enough data. Maybe that speaks to the 86% of people that said you should be collecting more. We've come up with a list before, and I'll go over with a few of them, ideas of how you could collect more data from a follow-up, and that'd be utilizing interns or AmeriCorps Vista workers, because a lot of people just don't have the resources to collect this information. But I think one of the ones I like, even sure that follow-ups or post-assessments are required. So, for example, one of our clients provides online trainings. Participant cannot start that online training before they complete a pretest, and they cannot print out their certificate unless they fill out a post-test, a post-assessment, basically. There's other ways to make this happen as well, maintaining that a post-assessment is part of the program that a person is involved with. So really integrating your impact measurement program with your programs. Impact measurement is a part of a program or service wherein completion of these types of forms and data gathering is a part of a service that you're offering to a client. It should be required. I want to thank you all so much. I really appreciate this. It's been a long time since I put on a webinar. I hope you all learned something. I want to pause and see if you have any other questions, comments, or ideas. Give you 15 seconds or so. If the chats start rolling in, I'd gladly address some of them. And then I'd like to turn it back over to Heather and thank her so much for the hard work she's done.
Thank you, Michael. I'll give folks a couple of seconds too and let you know if I see anything come in. I'm not seeing anything come in, so I'm going to start closing too, and if I see something come in, I'll just interrupt myself. So thank you, Michael, too, for that wonderful presentation, and everyone for participating in the webinar. I hope that we provided information that's going to be useful to develop your own impact measurement program or kind of get started, or, you know, build up the program you already have. I wanted to make sure and point out that a very brief survey should pop up when you close this webinar. Please fill it out. It helps us track this webinar series and make sure that we always continue to improve. And also, as Michael mentioned, next month's webinar is going to take place Wednesday, October 19th at noon Mountain Time. We're going to be discussing additional topics in impact measurement, specifically data management and reporting, with Michael and Andrea Akers from Sweetgrass, who will be joining him. And we'll be sending out more information on that webinar soon. So that being said, have a wonderful rest of your day. And I saw one question pop in that says, can we get a hard copy of the model? And yeah, we'll be, I'll be sending this, a PDF of this presentation and the recording to everybody following the webinar. So you should be able to have that to take with you. All right, that being said, thank you so much. And I'll let all of y'all go get rest of your day. Bye.